So, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. We are really excited about this conversation and ability to partner with Central Park Conservancy. Uh, this program was actually motivated by you. A lot of people, after seeing Kimberly's work on View as a part of Land and River, really wanted to learn more about Seneca Village. And so we were very excited when we reached out to Central Park Conservancy that they were open to having this conversation and sharing about Seneca Village with us this evening. And so what you will, I think, learn about is not only what the history of Seneca Village was, but how an organization is working to
Mhm.
document and share that information with us today. And so I'm happy and thrilled to introduce Jessica MacLean, who is going to share information with us from Central Park Conservancy. Jessica is a historian working on this project,
Mhm.
connected with the organization, and a New York resident, so has a lot of, is living and working in that kind of space. And so, again, thank you for coming, Jessica. Thank you for being here with us this evening. And I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a sincere pleasure to be here with you all. As Janelle shared, I'm speaking to you in my role with the Central Park Conservancy as public historian. And I want to thank the Tephra Institute, Janelle and Sophia, for inviting me to speak with you tonight. Unfortunately, Kimberly Becoat is not able to be with us, but it's really her extraordinary work that brings us here tonight in conversation. Um, and so I look forward to, after my presentation, having the opportunity to answer any further questions you may have. But I also want to share that while I am the one speaking with you here tonight, that I am one member of a team of four dedicated to this project here at the Conservancy. And that really we here at the Conservancy are but one branch of many who are researching Seneca Village history. And so part of our role is to bring these different histories together and share them out to you all. So I will turn now. Yes. All right. Now, just to start with a little bit of an overview, um, before Central Park, the landscape along what is now the park's perimeter from approximately 82nd Street to 89th Street was home to a predominantly Black community known as Seneca Village. One of the popular misconceptions is that Seneca Village occupied the entire area of Central Park. It did not. It was, however, the most densely settled portion of the 840 acres that would become Central Park. Seneca Village, at its height, had three churches, a school, and high rates of property ownership, which in some cases made male owners eligible to vote. And when the city acquired the land for the park in 1857, Seneca Village and its residents were displaced and forgotten about. What you see here, if for those of you who are familiar with Central Park, we are on the west side here. This is an overlay of the Viele map, and you can see stretching from 82nd Street north to 88th Street. This outline here is of the current reservoir, and what you see right here with these baseball diamonds is what's now known as the Great Lawn, but in the 1830s was home to the receiving reservoir of the Croton Aqueduct. So through time, this landscape has changed. I want to start by giving you a little bit of historical background about how Central Park came into being, because that is how and why Seneca Village ceased to exist. Now, between 1776 and 1850, New York City experienced a time of massive population growth and also physical development, which is illustrated here in these three maps. On the left, we have, and when I talk about New York City this evening, I'm talking exclusively about Manhattan. The five boroughs, which represent New York City today, didn't come together until 1899. So whenever I say New York City, I'm specifically speaking about the island of Manhattan. So just to orient you here, the maps are oriented east-west. The southern tip of Manhattan here is on the left, and north is here on the right. In 1776, you can see that the concentration, that population is concentrated at the bottom of the island. And these shaded areas here in red indicate where people were settled. As the colonial city developed, the streets were privately managed and the city grew organically. Um, if you note here, you can see sort of the jumbled colonial streets, and it is not that neat grid plan that most people associate Manhattan with. By 1811, the city's population had grown significantly, and the need to manage and regulate development emerged as a priority. And so, in answer, the city established a grid plan mapping out future streets in city blocks. So, you can see here in 1811, population had moved up. This location right here is City Hall Park. And then by 1850, the city had expanded north to 30th Street, and the street grid had begun to be physically carved into the city. So what you see in this map here is the projected grid, the grid being projected onto the landscape, but it hadn't physically been carved into the landscape, so to speak. So no roads had been laid. But by 1850, you can start seeing the grid being built in the landscape. Here you can see the densely populated city in this 1850 bird's eye view of Lower Manhattan. So, and it's as if you had just flown over Governor's Island from Brooklyn on your way to land at Union Square in Manhattan. So here we have Governor's Island here at the bottom, and Union Square is sort of center right up here. But you can get a sense for how the population was still concentrated in Lower Manhattan, and the East River here on the right and the Hudson River here on the left served as the highways for the city, channeling goods from the interior of the country to the rest of the world. And in return, goods coming into the port of New York were then sent into the interior of the country. Now, infrastructure, Manhattan, what is happening at this time period, these 50 plus years between 1790 and 1850, is the physical transformation of the landscape of Manhattan. And it's transformed not only because of the implementation of the city grid, but because of the implementation of the Croton Aqueduct, followed by Central Park. So what we see in the early 19th century is the city that we know today as Manhattan being built, being physically built. The grid was imposed on the city, ignoring prior land ownership or topography, and that really spurred development north of 30th Street. With densely populated areas, people living in close proximity to one another, you have the emergence of diseases, and diseases being passed when you don't have sources of fresh water, and you have folks who are going to the bathroom without a sewer system, right? This is prior to the implementation of the sewer. Waterborne illnesses became a huge struggle for the city. And so the Croton Aqueduct was an answer to the need for fresh water. And this was the creation of reservoirs up in Westchester and then the piping of water down into New York City, which was essential to public health. So these three, and then in addition, the rapid pace of development prompted city officials to set aside parkland intended as a reprieve from the urban environment for all of city residents. So these three large-scale infrastructure projects reshaped the landscape and gave birth to the city that we know today. In 1856, the future site of Central Park was surveyed and mapped by Egbert Viele. And that map is seen here in the bottom left. And the area of Central Park consists of 840 acres. And in 1856, these 840 acres were inhabited by 1,600 residents. And among these 1,600 residents included Seneca villagers. And so you see this map down here on the bottom left is a blow up of this area here within sort of the middle part of Central Park. Here you can see the receiving reservoir, which is where the water from the Croton Aqueduct was collected in the city, and then it was sent down to what is now Bryant Park and the New York Public Library, which was also a reservoir, and that was known as the distributing reservoir. And from there, water was sent to residents of Manhattan. So this 1856 Viele map is one of only two historical maps that depict the free, predominantly African-American Seneca Village. There are no known images or pictures of the village, which I will get to and speak to a little bit further in just a few minutes. Seneca Village began in 1825 when Andrew Williams, a 25-year-old Black shoeshine, bought 3 lots from John and Elizabeth Whitehead. They owned a farm and located in what is now the West 80s and 90s. And made a decision to divide their land into individual lots and sold them. Epiphany Davis, a store clerk, was the second person to purchase land, and the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, otherwise known as the AME Zion, also were among the first to purchase several lots. And what we see happening is between 1825 and 1832, the Whiteheads sold about half of their land parcels to African Americans. And by the 1830s, there were approximately 10 homes in the village. By 1855, Seneca Village was home to an estimated 225 people, consisting of 50 families. Approximately 2/3 of Seneca villagers were Black, and the remaining 1/3 were of European descent and primarily Irish immigrants. And in 1853, the city was authorized, actually by the state, to purchase the land for Central Park through the use of eminent domain and gave public notice. You can see here on the left, this is a public notice that was published in a newspaper for the taking of land for, quote, the laying out of a public place. And it is this notice and this taking of the land that sets in motion the removal of Seneca villagers. Those who owned property were compensated for its value, and residents were required to leave their homes and Seneca Village. And this process of removal happened throughout the 840 acres. And basically, by the fall of 1857, all individuals who lived in both Seneca Village and the land that would become Central Park had left. Excuse me, that is an adjacent phone call. I am in my office. William, the community contested seizure of the land. So through the process of eminent domain, the city, the entity taking the property, is legally required to pay individuals for the taking of their land. So property values assessed by the city, however, what we see in the documentary record is that those values were actively contested by the residents of Seneca Village, along with others who lived in the pre-park area. What you see here on the screen are two affidavits. These are in the collections of the municipal archives. And these are documents that were submitted to the Supreme Court of New York City, um, uh, basically saying, and this William Matthews, who was a preacher in Seneca Village, he says, "Hey, wait, you have not given me enough money because what you are paying me for is the property value exclusively. What you're not including are those improvements that I have made to my property." And in this case, he had added a well, he had planted an orchard, and had made other improvements to the land, which would increase property value. So, what we see in the documentary record is this back and forth between the city of New York and Seneca villagers contesting the taking of land. What you see here, I think, is a particularly powerful piece. This affidavit is submitted by Andrew Williams. He is the Black shoe shiner and among the first individuals to purchase land in 1825. And what you see here is an X. He either suggesting he was not literate, he was not able to read or write, or he chooses to represent himself as being unable to read or write. But it is these documents that give us insight into the individuals who lived in Seneca Village. By 1857, the residents of Seneca Village had dispersed and relocated. And one of the questions that were asked is, have we been able to track family members and see where they relocated after they left the park? And what we see is a dispersal of individuals throughout the city and into neighboring states like New Jersey. So we don't see a communal moving, a maintenance of those community networks, but we see individuals scattering. So, for example, the Wilson family, who I'll speak to in just a moment, they followed the All Angels Church to the Upper West Side and relocated in the 80s. The Dunn family, for example, they relocated to Harlem. The Williams family, Andrew Williams and his wife Elizabeth, we have found them moving east into Newtown, Queens, where they purchased property and reestablished their family. The Landons, they moved west across the Hudson to Monmouth, New Jersey. But what's significant here, and I think this is where one of the pieces that are really important to hold in mind is that each family was forced to rebuild their lives and community networks. And it is these community networks, reestablishing these networks, were exacerbated and made more difficult by the structural racism that impacted Black communities in the mid-19th century. So while there was compensation, what you get is the breaking down of these networks, breaking down of these relationships. The loss of what is powerful is the existence of the colored school number 3, where Seneca villagers sent their children. And so these really powerful connections that helped create access and stability, and in the case of male Seneca villagers, the ability to vote, these networks were broken with the scattering of Seneca villagers and the creation of Central Park. So that's sort of the background of Seneca Village, sort of the history of it. And what I want to just share a little bit, though, is also how the creation of Central Park, in the creation of Central Park, it'll give you a sense of the remaking, the remodeling of the landscape that happens in New York City, and how the 19th century landscape, to a great extent, is preserved in the area of Seneca Village in the park. The construction of Central Park began in 1858 with the clearing of the land. And this included the demolition of buildings. And by 1864, construction of the park was well underway. One of the pieces that it's important to hold in mind is that Central Park is, in essence, an art piece. It was a created natural landscape that, while is now natural, right, consisting of natural environment, it is artificial. It did not exist. It's not the preservation of a wilderness or natural environment that existed in the 1850s. And so what you can see here is a view of what the area looked like prior to construction and 1862. So you can see these large outcroppings of rock. So you see very rocky, sort of undulating topography. Trees were very early on very early on in the European colonization of Manhattan. Were cut down for firewood and for building. So what you see is a very open landscape. And then by 1864, what you can see on the right is the construction of the park. And I want you just to take a look here along the west side. And what you will see is open farmland. And the city of New York is not yet caught up to Central Park. So all of the buildings around Central Park were built and created after Central Park was built. Now, the grid when it cut through the city, as the building of the park was underway, so too was the remodeling of the surrounding landscape as the street grid moved northwards with no accommodation for the natural landscape. You can see here on the left in this lithograph, this is 2nd Avenue at 42nd Street. So we're looking north. And what you can see is this new street grid coming through, and it is literally the rock is being blasted to create the grid. And you can see here an example of a house that was essentially orphaned at the pre-grid topography. And you can see here the stairs that this family had to construct to then access their home. Whereas here on the left, what you see are the townhomes and the apartment buildings that start to grow along the new ground level that is established in Manhattan. Here is an actual photograph of this same process at 84th Street and Broadway. So you can see the new leveling and the new ground level being created here. And this house was eventually taken down and this rock outcrop was removed. So all of this remodeling is happening to Manhattan at this time. This amazing photograph is an image of 8th Avenue at 106th Street. And this gives a sense for the remodeling and literal flattening of hills. So on the right side here, you can see the remnant of a hill which is preserved now in Central Park. And on the left, this here is what's now Central Park West on the Upper West Side. So I want you to take note of this rock outcrop here. And as I move into the next slide, this is that same view today. So the rock on the right is preserved here in Central Park, and Central Park West on the left side has become, is an apartment building. So that just to give you a sense of the remodeling and basically sort of the obliteration of the extant New York City topography that happens in the mid-19th century. As Frederick Law Olmsted, one of Central Park's designers, stressed, one of the design principles of the park was that it serve as an exception to the rigid regularity of the newly implemented bridge. And his words were prescient, sort of recognizing that the park's creation would, in a sense, preserve the original character of the landscape of Manhattan, which was obliterated elsewhere. And this preservation of the 19th century topography is particularly present in the park. The area of Seneca Village is one of the least modified parts of Central Park. So if we turn to this 1855 map by Viele, what we see are parts of the landscape that he identifies. We have up here Summit Rock, Tanner Spring, which was a natural water source with water continually bubbling to the surface. And then we have these massive bedrock outcrops that exist all across the park. And so today, the park contains enduring features of Seneca Village's physical landscape. And this will become, so what you can see here, well, you sort of can, but here is this massive outcrop of bedrock. Here we have Summit Rock. This is Central Park West in the Upper West Side here. And this is Tanner Spring. So if you were to transport yourself right now to Central Park, and it happened to be daylight, this is a view looking west up Summit Rock, which is at 83rd Street. And if you were to walk over the edge of this hill here, what you would drop down to Central Park West. And so you can see here, this is the remodeling of the rock where it was removed for the grid. So this illustrates, again, the radically changed topography of the streets literally being cut through the bedrock. This image here is an illustration from Summit Rock, looking west towards, these are the Palisades here in New Jersey. And this is really what the landscape would have looked like prior to the grid and the creation of Central Park. So you can see sort of dispersed houses, and then these are those bedrock outcrops. Now in the winter is a good time. The view on the right side here, you're standing on the top of Summit Rock. And if you, in the winter, you can look down 83rd and you will get a glimpse of the Palisades. Another enduring feature is Tanner Spring, which is a location where Seneca villagers would have gotten fresh water. And that remains in the park today as a reminder of the continuity of the landscape. And in this case, nature and water's perseverance, despite our best efforts to create a new landscape. Now, in 1992, historians Roy Rosenzweig and Elizabeth Blackmar restored public knowledge of Seneca Village and discovered the community in their research in the writing of this book, of their seminal work, really known as The Park and the People, which was a social history of Central Park, and includes an examination of the lives of the people who are, including an examination of the lives of the individuals who were directly impacted by the creation of Central Park. And they are really the ones that reintroduced Seneca Village to the public knowledge. This prompted a decade of research by Cynthia Copeland, who is a public historian at the New York Historical, and includes an exhibit and teacher's guide that she created in 2010. And it is really this moment in 1992 that spurred the historical, or spurred the research that I am sharing with you today, and has helped to illuminate the lives of Seneca villagers. So in the previous slides, where I'm sharing with you 225 villagers, approximately 50 families, how do we know these things? How do we know what we know about Seneca Village? There are two sort of primary sources. The first is the documentary record, and that is that is the bread and butter of historians. And what you see are on this slide are different examples of the type of historical records that give different information about Seneca villagers. Top left here, we have the 1950 federal census. This provides valuable demographic information. It provides racial information. This is how we know there were two-thirds of the community was Black and 1/3 was Irish, because it also records place of birth. We also, one of the reasons why we use Black as opposed to African American is that the census has helped us to come to understand. For example, there is a gentleman who was born in Haiti, and so sort of identities sort of mirror that of New York City, with different waves of immigration, of enslaved people being brought to the city and becoming free. Newspapers are another source of information, right? Those affidavits that I mentioned, which are stored in the New York City Municipal Archives, right? That gives us more information about property. And then because of the nature in which Seneca Village was erased, that is through the taking of land through eminent domain, there is an extraordinary record. There's an 1856 Sage map, which is a condemnation map. And what is recorded on this map are literally the outlines of each lot owned by Seneca villagers. It describes who owned the lots. And what you can see, as you see here, is the outlines of the buildings of Seneca Village. So what you see here is All Angels Episcopal Church. And this here is home to the Wilson family. And Mr. Wilson was the sexton of the All Angels Church, hence his proximity to the church. So each of these different forms of records that exist provide different information that we draw upon to understand the history of Seneca Village. Now, one of the really challenging things is that there are no pictures, no known pictures of Seneca Village, of the buildings, and no known pictures of Seneca villagers. These beautiful photographs here of Alborough Lyons on the left and his wife, Mary Joseph Lyons. Alborough and Mary Lyon were landowners, but they never lived in Seneca Village. And one of the interesting pieces about Seneca Village is that you have folks who owned land and built homes and lived in the village. You had Blacks who purchased land as investment properties, but lived elsewhere in Lower Manhattan and in one case in Brooklyn. And then you have folks who rented rooms. You had folks who rented homes. So you have the variability that you have in Lower Manhattan in terms of property ownership. So you'll often see the image of Alborough and Mary Lyon as being Seneca Village residents. But they never lived in Seneca Village. We have one image. This on the right is of Levin Smith, and he was one of the deacons of the AME Zion Church who purchased land in 1825, and in the 1840s, it took till the 1840s to build an actual physical church in the park. So one of the challenges of sharing this history, particularly through mediums such as Instagram or through web, which are visual mediums, it is difficult because we have to use different ways of conveying the images and stories of Seneca villagers. The other type of information that we have is archaeological. And my background is actually, I am a historical archaeologist. And so My understanding of Seneca Village history combines the documentary record with the archaeological record. And in 2011, the Institute for the Exploration of Seneca Village History, which included archaeologists and Cynthia Copeland, who was the public historian at New York Historical, they excavated Seneca Village. And that has given us a whole host of additional information about villagers and really intimate glimpses into everyday life. So the type of information we get are this here are faceted blue glass beads. This was worn by someone in the Wilson family home. We have bone buttons. We now can understand what type, an example of a teapot that would have been used in a Seneca villager's home. Another thing that's gleaned from archaeology through the study of soil, this little thing down here is a raspberry seed. And yes, this little cutaway here is a rodent's bite, probably eaten by a mouse or a rat at some point. But this type of analysis helps us understand what Seneca villagers were growing, what thing they were eating, and what kinds of sort of the natural environment. And then we also get through the process of archaeology an understanding of the creation of Central Park. So when I show these kinds of layers here, what you're seeing is this layer here represents all the fill that is brought in from elsewhere, including New Jersey, to create Central Park. And then buried beneath this fill here are the layers of Seneca Village. Now, the research question that was asked by this team was twofold. They wanted to see whether the map by Egbert Viele was an accurate representation of where the homes of Seneca villagers were located. And then the other question was, is there anything left of Seneca Village to find, or was it erased by the creation of Central Park? And what was found was, yes, there are remains of the Seneca villagers' homes that can be found. So what you see here on the left is the corner of All Angels Church. That church was physically lifted up and actually moved to the 80s. It's the only building that we know of in Seneca Village that was moved in its entirety. And then here on the right, you see Madeline here in this excavation unit in the outline of the Wilson family home. And what the excavations in the Wilson family home is highlight daily life. Those things that are not included in the documentary record, because it's not the kind of information that makes its way in. It's not legal information. It's not demographic information. It's the intimate day-to-day information that we leave behind when we throw things away. This, for example, what am I? This was found beneath the floorboards of the Wilson house. This is where I ask you to put on your archaeological hats and think about what is it made of. Its length, right? It is less than 4 centimeters. If I were to say wipe the slate clean, this is a slate pencil that was found beneath in the Wilson family home. Now, this is significant because when you look at colored school number 3, which was established in 1840 in Seneca Village, it was one of only a handful of Black schools in the city at that time. And the 1855 census indicates that all 5 of the Wilson school-age children, and they had 9 children, that all 5 of their school-age children attended school, as did 3/4 of all Seneca Village children, right? So we see a real value placed on education. And then also the social and economic mobility that being able to read and write affords a community. One of the powerful stories here is when we look in the 1840 census, Charlotte Wilson was unable to read or write. And then by the 1855 census, she is marked as being literate. So you can imagine her learning to read and write alongside her children. Here's another object found in the Wilson family home. This is made of bone, right? This is the handle of a bone toothbrush. So what's missing is its head here, and the tip is broken off. And you say, oh, okay, it's a toothbrush, right? But this is really unusual find in 1850. For example, in 1920, only 20% of the American public routinely used toothbrushes. So what does this say about the Wilson family, right? That they had an understanding of hygiene and health, and the associated, I should say, the associated health benefits of brushing the teeth, right? So this shifts the entire perception of Seneca villagers. And just to conclude, I wanted to address Janelle's question of sort of how do we see Seneca Village? How is it that we're able to document and share what we know? And what we've just on our web, one of blah, 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 blah. One of the things we are trying to do as the Conservancy is to bring together the work that is being done on Seneca Village to then share it out to the community. We have just redone our website. You can see here the URL above. We are working to bring together information so that you can, even if you are in Virginia, come to our website and learn more about the community. There's a question and answer segment that has a great deal of detailed information and additional resources that you can learn more about the community. If you're able to come to New York City, in the landscape, we have a walking tour that takes you through the community and highlights different aspects of people's lives, different houses. Currently, the playground nearest to Seneca Village is under construction, so there is a temporary route, but by the end of this summer, that work will be done and the full site will be made available again. One of our collaborators is this team of researchers envisioning Seneca Village. They have taken existing documentary record and combined that with an understanding of architecture in the 19th century and created a 3D visualization of the community. This is a living resource. As they gain more information about the community, their interpretation is going to shift and they will adjust. So this is one of the exciting things about this kind of interpretive platform, is that it is constantly changing as more information is known. One of the other ways is through writing, and highlighted here are four of the works that have been written about Seneca Village. We have two young adult books, Home is with Our Family, which takes sort of the historical narrative of Seneca Village and learning about the Clarence of the community from the perspective of a young girl who lives in the community. And just this past April, Cameron Garrett published a middle grade reader for middle grade readers, a book called The Forgotten Summer of Seneca Village, which imagines the community still existing. And so these are really powerful ways of bringing Seneca Village to life in different ways. Marilyn Nelson wrote a book of poems based on the historic information about Seneca villagers. She's been gracious enough to let us record her, and in the coming month, stay tuned for us posting her reading her work on our website. The other piece I want to share is with generous support from the Mellon Foundation's Monument Project initiative. We received a grant to spend the next 2 years uh, thinking about the permanent commemoration of Seneca Village in Central Park. And the funding that the Mellon grant provides is allowing us to do 2 years of public programs to deepen awareness of Seneca Village and also to encourage new thinking about commemoration and have explicit conversations about how race, history, and public space intersect. And at the end of these 2 years, we will pull together a framework that in phase 2 will be the actual visioning of what that monument is. But part of the work we're trying to do is to get people to think about new forms of commemoration and what might that look like in the park itself, within the physical landscape of the park, to move away from the notion of a monument, right? And also asking the question, how do you commemorate a village? One of the things that we feel very strongly about is that we want to not just talk about or have the Seneca Village story be about the displacement of the community, but we also really want people to get to know Seneca villagers over that 30 years that it existed and those individual lives. And as my colleague John Reddick, who is pictured here in the bottom left, in order to experience loss, you have to have something to lose, right? And the richness of the stories of individual members of Seneca Village is one of the things that we want the public to know. So it's not just about loss, but it's about the vibrancy of the community when it did exist. And one example of a public program that we hosted this past September. This September marked the 200th anniversary of Seneca Village. We partnered with Mother AME Zion Church, which is today in Harlem with branches all over the country. But they were one of the original purchasers of land in Seneca Village. So we spent the day with them and hosted public conversation about the history of the church combined with the history of Seneca Village, which was a really great way to get out in the community and to highlight these connections and these points of living continuity where the story of Seneca Village has not ended. Another way is through music, through art, through dance, through spoken word. And this is where Kimberly Becoat's work, right, through art is one of the other ways of provoking, of thinking and conversations about Seneca Village. We have what you see in the top left. This is on the left here. This is Kai Diata Giovanni and her colleagues Courtney Simone Stanton and Jaden Antwine. Kai is the poet laureate of New York City. She wrote a series of poems based on Seneca Village. We've also partnered with actor and tap dancer DeWitt Fleming, who is pictured here. He has interpreted Seneca Village through the eyes of Andrew Williams. You see him here performing a piece from the perspective of Andrew Williams. And this spring, he will be expanding that to have a host of performers who will be bringing different members of the community to life in the park. So this is just sort of the example of the different ways that we are working to connect people to the history of Seneca Village and help people think about Seneca Village in other mediums, not just through history, but taking that history and really bringing it to life.